Well, good evening, everybody. Special welcome to those that are listening after the event on the recording. I hope that you're going to be able to make the most out of this session. It's going to be an exciting one as we have a look at flex budgets and standard costing and the calculation of some variances. And I know that this is an area that isn't all that popular, so it's a great one for us to tackle together, and it's going to appear in your assessment in task number 3. Now, just as I load up task number 3, let me just tell you a little bit about this topic of variances. I believe that variances are not so bad. And I say that as somebody who battled with these when I first studied them, but overcame it with practice and realized actually they're really methodical. And if I learn the method, if I learn the rules, I learn the pro formas, then the numbers also almost sort of just slot into place. So one of the examples I use for this is cooking. I'm actually a really bad cook. My husband does most of the cooking in our house, I think primarily because he wants to stay alive. So I'm not a great cook, but I can follow instructions. I actually am quite good at that. So on the odd time when I do attempt to cook something, it comes out okay. And that's because I follow instructions. And I think for me, variances are very much like that. The difference is that we don't have the instructions in front of us on exam day. We've got to learn the instructions. We've got to learn the pro formas. So on the exam day, we carry those in our head. And when we get to the exam, we're able to just say, oh, okay, it wants a material usage variance. I know how to do that. And I can write down a blank version of a usage variance, because then I can focus all my effort in the exam on just filling in the numbers, because the pro forma, the skeleton, is already there in my head and transferred onto my workings paper in the exam. So I do think with some learning on this topic, it will become much, much better. And something else that you can think about in terms of how to learn this is perhaps just using little flashcards. You could create a flashcard, perhaps on the one side it says material usage variance, on the other side it has the answer. And you carry these around, you take them on the bus or the train to work, any journeys that you do and you've got a spare 15 minutes in your lunch break, just scroll through them, test yourself, see if you can remember what that material usage variance is before you turn the flashcard over, and the answer will be on the other side. So you can check as you go along. You can then have 2 piles, the ones that you think you've learned and the ones that you're still learning. And I think psychologically that really helps, because the pile of things that you're learning gets bigger and the pile of ones that you don't know gets smaller. So that would be my advice, I think, to tackle the learning of this topic. So if you haven't seen our notes before, you'll see that for each task, we firstly tell you what it will cover. So this one is going to be flex budgets and standard costing. So some variances in here. It's worth 18 marks, giving us 23 minutes to complete it. Now, if you are not very confident with these skeleton variances, then this is going to be a very time-pressured task, as you desperately try to work out which numbers you're using. There's numbers everywhere. Which ones do you want? Which ones are not actually needed at all? But if you know the actual pro formas, it will be better. I still think this is quite a time-pressured task. As we have a look at this one now together, I think you will see there's actually a lot to do for the mark allocation. The other thing that we give you that I'm not going to go through now is a task briefing. But if you're feeling a little bit rusty on this area, or you feel that you need a few extra notes or a bit more of a shove in the right direction, then have a look through that task briefing. It's really just a summary, like a set of revision notes covering the technical material that you need in order to be able to cope with this sort of question. So really, really useful stuff in there. And if we had more time, I'd probably run through all of it with you. But if we run through all of that, we won't have time for our actual task. So know that it's there, all really great stuff, particularly these pro formas. Here they are, the blank versions, or the skeletons, as I called them. These are the bits that I want you to be able to write down. If I say to you material usage variance, I want you to be able to write down this. Because if you can do that, you can do these tasks. If you can write down a blank version of that, then I wholeheartedly believe that you can get the full marks on that particular part of the task. Because once you've done that part, you've done the hard work. You've now just got to do exactly what it tells you to do. And this is like your instructions. So it says it's based on an actual production volume. So we start with the actual production volume. So I find that in the question. Then I work out what should happen and what did happen. All of that will be given to me in the question. We'll see this as we go along. So I'm really going to use these variance pro formas as we go along and as we tackle each part of this task. So there's lots there because there's lots of different variances that we may come across. Let's just keep going past all of those. Do make sure that you learn them. Make sure that you know all those. I know there's a lot. That's why I suggested the flashcards as a way of learning them. So here we are. We're going to dive straight in with our tasks. Be a great opportunity for you to work out which of these variances you do already know and which ones you still need to put a bit more effort into. So I think the main thing with a question like this is not to get overwhelmed, and we will literally tackle each part at a time. So part A is just up to here. So all I need to start with is that first bit. So to avoid getting overwhelmed, I just read part A. It tells me a company purchases 4,000 kilograms of material at a cost of £34,000 and the total material price variance is £2,000 adverse. So immediately you perhaps get a little bit panicked here because it's like, but Anne, you just told me we're calculating variances and it tells me what the variance is. Oh my goodness, what's this all about? This is what we might refer to as a backwards variance. And this only happens in exams. It doesn't happen in real life because in real life, you need to know the standard cost of a kilogram to find the variance in the first place. This is just the examiner's way of checking you really do understand variances and can work backwards if you need to. So I'm being asked for the standard cost of a kilogram. I've been told the material price variance. So this is now where my strategy comes into play. And I'm going to write out a blank version of a material price variance. So this is what you're going to have on your flashcards. This is what is ultimately going to be in your head when you get to exam day. So my material price variance, and I always like to start with a little sentence. My material price variance is based on actual purchases. And yet again, I think if I learn that, I'm over halfway there already with this variance. And all I've done is written out one sentence. Price variance bracket based on actual purchases. This to me is the crux of this question. And this comes back to your understanding of flexed budgets. I'm sure you understand the concept of a flexed budget. So we can compare like with like. I can compare like production quantities or like number of hours or the like number of kilograms. There's no point comparing different quantities. Of course, I'll get completely different answers. I have to compare like with like. So my blank version of this variance will say, it says here it's based on actual purchases. So it will actually say actual purchases, then I can leave a space to fill in what they're going to be. Actual purchases should cost. And because I compare like with like, I then want to know what my actual purchases did cost. And the difference between those two things is going to be my variance. And that's the pro forma I need to carry around in my head for material price. But look at how that first sentence helped me. It was based on actual purchases. So that's the beginning of each of my rows. The first one then says should, the next one says did, and I'm almost there. Okay, now before we get too far ahead, that is the pro forma. So that's what you need to have learnt. Let's now try to find some of this information. Now, one of the first things I like to do with any variance question really is to find the standard. So almost sort of reconstruct a standard cost card, if you like. I want to know what should be happening. And here, that's what the question asks for. So already That's why I know it's a different approach. It's asking me for the standard cost of a kilogram, and normally that would be my starting point. So let's fill in though what we do know. We need to know the actual purchases. What did we buy? Well, we buy in kilograms. So a company purchases, past tense, company purchases 4,000 kilograms of material. They are my actual purchases. What did they cost? Well, they cost £34,000. So that is the actual information. Super important that I get together the difference between the actual and the budgeted information. That really does matter. So 4,000 kilograms costing £34,000 there. So I'm going to fill this in. It wants to know the actual purchases. You write 4,000 kilograms. Remember, you're comparing like with like. So actual purchases should cost. Actual purchases did cost. They're both based on 4,000 kilograms. We know what they did cost because the question told us they cost £34,000. And I see what you have done there with the £8.50. Is it Isa? Yep, you've actually right. The cost per kilogram, the actual cost per kilogram is £8.50. I spent £34,000 buying 4,000 kilograms of material, so I actually spent £8.50 per kilogram. That's useful for other questions, possibly. I didn't actually need that here. Not to say that you shouldn't calculate it if it helps get your head around what's happening, by all means, but it wasn't needed here. I'm looking for how many kilograms I purchased and what they cost. So that's £34,000. Now, because this is a backwards variance question, the question then tells me what the variance is. It tells me that I spent £34,000, I know that now, and that resulted in a £2,000 adverse variance. What does adverse mean? Anybody remind me, what does an adverse variance mean? Does it mean things turned out better than expected or things turned out worse than expected? What do you think? Worse than expected, absolutely. So that means that I overspent then. Adverse is an overspend. So I spent 34,000. How much do you think I should have spent? What is this balancing figure here? Good. Yeah, it means that we paid more than we should have done. So that makes this one £32,000. So be super careful how you work that out, because if you get the rest of it right and then you stumble at that last hurdle, it's such a shame because you were so close. But the computer only knows the right or wrong. It's a computer marked answer. So that's it. If you get it sort of wrong in the end stages, there's nothing we can do there. But you spent more than you should have done. So just look at that logically again and think, well, okay, so if it should have cost me 32, it did cost me 34, then that is an overspend. So that looks right. No problem. It's great that we get to practice these things, isn't it? So we hone our technique before the real thing. Now, the question actually wants to know the standard cost per kilogram. Well, I now know the standard cost information. This is what should have happened. What should happen is the standard. The standard is like the budget. It's our expectation of what should be happening. So the standard cost of a kilogram can now be found. Anybody like to tell me what you think that might be? What is the standard cost of 1 kilogram? Excellent. Thank you for that. Quite right. We did spend 32,000 altogether, and that was to buy 4,000 kilograms. So dividing one by the other gives me a price of £8 per kilogram. And just a bit of a tip if you struggle with the maths for this, if we're looking for the price per kilogram or the cost per kilogram, the cost per kilogram is just like a division sign. So if you take the cost, as in the money, and then you divide by the kilograms, which is what we did here, cost divided by kilograms, you get the cost per kilogram. So the answer was 8. Excellent. So that was the first part of the task there, part A. And what we have in this task, which I think almost makes it a little bit more difficult, is just a series of another one, then another one, and another one, each one different information and something completely new. So I've got to go through this process many times in this task, which is actually really great practice because we are in a revision session. So the more different variances we can revise, the better prepared we're going to be. But that was the first one. Great. So again, to avoid getting overwhelmed, I'm just going to look at a little bit at a time. So I then have a bit more information, starting with the company purchases and uses 210,000 litres and ending here with the material usage variance is. So this is the next part of the task, part B. Now this one's a bit different because this one's asking me for the variance. So I suppose in some ways it's more straightforward than the first one because it's a forwards variance rather than a backwards variance. So it's a material usage variance. Now, to be honest, if I was in the exam now and I saw the word material usage variance, I would be straight in with my material usage variance that I've learnt. And the reason I might do it before I read the question is because I don't want to find anything in the question that's going to cause me to be in a bit of a panic. So I'm going to write my variance down before I read the rest of the question, so I can't be panicked by anything it might tell me. And my sentence that goes with material usage is that it's based on actual production. You learn that sentence, you are more than halfway there. Because when you actually then come to fill it in, you say, well, it's based on actual production. So that's where I start. So actual production, bit of a space, so we can actually fill it in. And then the word should. And then again, like with like, always comparing like with like, otherwise there's no point. Actual production did. Well, it's about usage, isn't it? It's a usage variance. So what word do I want in here? I'm going to put use. So actual production should use. Actual production did use. That's going to be in kilograms. So I'm going to be using more or less kilograms than I planned. So that's my variance. But my variance is in kilograms. So what do I do at the very end of this? Well, I turn it into money. And I turn it into money by multiplying by the standard cost of 1 kilogram. That will then give me the variance in pounds, which is what the question asked for. And before I read any information about the question, I got that on my page because now I have my instructions. And if I've got the instructions, I've now just got to focus on grabbing the bits of information that the instructions say that I need. So I do ideally like to start by working out the should information, like maybe from a standard cost card. I like to know the information for 1 unit. So let's just read through and see what we've actually got and if we can understand what's happening here. So a company purchases and uses 210,000 litres of material at a cost of 75 pence per litre. Now, if we just read through this sentence by sentence, purchases and uses, past tense, 210,000 litres costing 75 pence per litre. That is clearly actual information. It's telling me what I purchased, what I used, and what it cost. Then we get into the budgeted. Budgeted is standard. Budgeted is the should. This is what should happen. The budgeted production was 20,000 units. So I planned to make 20,000 units of my finished product, and I planned to use 200,000 litres of material to do that. And I planned to spend 140,000. So that sentence is the should happen, or the should, the standard information. So my first sentence is actual. The second sentence is the should. And then it also goes back to the actual that I did produce 21,500 units. So what I would like to do is to break down what should happen here into almost like a standard cost card. And a standard cost card would tell me how many litres do I need for each unit and how much does each litre cost me. So I want to know how many litres and what's the cost per litre. And I think finding that initially, again, it calms me down. It's something that I can do with every question, and I am going to need it as I put my answer together anyway. So let's look. We plan to make 20,000 units and I need 200,000 litres of material. So how many litres do I need for each unit? Looking for litres per unit. Remember what I said about that word per. If you've got the number of litres and you turn the word per into a division sign, so litres per unit, litres divide by units, and that's your answer, 10. Well done. So 10 litres per unit. Then I want to know the cost per litre. Exactly the same idea. Cost per litre. Turn the per into a division sign. Find the cost. The cost is supposed to be 140,000. That's the cost of 200,000 litres. $140,000 spent buying 200,000 litres. I'm getting 70 pence per litre. Excellent. And actually, way back in level 2, we learn about standard cost cards. We do more with it in level 3, and here we are at level 4, we're still using it. And that's all that is a standard cost card. If I was making 1 unit, I'd be saying, I need 10 litres, it costs 70 pence per litre, so it's costing me £7 for a unit then. I like to get that information sussed out at the beginning. It calms me down. It's something that I know how to do, and I'm going to need this stuff. So there we are. That is the standard information. Now, let's get into the actual pro forma. We've written it down, which is great. And it starts with actual production. It says actual production should, actual production did. So let's start with the actual production then. There it is, 21,500 units. So you pick it out and you've calmed down now in the exam because you're just following the instructions. So 21,500 units are what you actually produced. We don't know what you're making, but whatever they are, you need you made 21,500 of them. They should use, oh, I've put kilograms, haven't I? We're in litres now. Never mind. Let's swap that over. Litres, litres, litres. So we should use, we just saw that, we just worked it out. We should use 10 litres for each unit. So if I've got 21,500 units, I'm talking about 215,000 litres. With this sort of question, the question will tell me what I did use. Can you find that? How many litres did we actually use? And then maybe you can go on and tell me what the variance is in litres. How many did we use? Yeah, that's the one. In the actual information from the first sentence, a company purchases and uses 210,000 litres. So let's put our 210,000 litres in there then. So we should use 215,000. We did use 210. We didn't use as much as we'd planned. Things turned out better than expected. So we've got 5,000 litres there as a favourable variance because things are better than we planned. And the standard cost of a litre, well, we worked that out, didn't we? To be 70 pence. So for every litre that I didn't use, that I originally planned to use, I save 70 pence. So that's a variance of £3,500 and it's favourable. Can you see that, Alison? The 3,500 there? Oh yeah, you gave me the variance in litres, didn't you? That was spot on. Absolutely. That's what I asked for first, I see. So you gave me the variance in litres. That's brilliant. Then we turn it into money by multiplying by the 70 pence to get the variance in pounds. Excellent. So what I hope that you can take away from this, the biggest learning is if you can write out the blank pro forma, can you see how we then just have to focus on grabbing the numbers out of the question? If you don't know that pro forma, then it's going to be hard because it's like cooking without the recipe. But we've got to use the recipe because we've got to get things as precise as we possibly can for the examiner. Good. So that's the second one. That was B. Then we're on to C. This really is a long question, as I said, because we've just got so many of these things to do, but it's great for a revision course because you get to practice lots of them. So here's the next one, C. A company expects to produce 50,000 units of Y using 40,000 hours of labour. Standard cost of labour is given. Okay, should we start to break it down? A company expects to produce. Standard cost is. Can you see how all of that is what should happen? All of that is my standard or my expectation. Here is what actually happened. Actual output was this. Actual hours worked were this. Cost was this. This is where the actual information starts here. So with every question, I need to separate what should happen from what actually happened. The actual is what did happen, isn't it? So however you want to differentiate that in your mind, what should happen, what did happen, you need to keep those separate. And we're calculating here a labour efficiency variance. So the first thing that I would probably do is write out my blank efficiency variance. And I quite like the fact that this comes after the material usage one, because to me, labour efficiency and material usage are the same. We change one or two words, but they are practically the same. So notice how material usage started with a sentence based on actual production. Labour efficiency is going to be based on actual production. So it starts the same, which means it will say actual production should. A little bit of a space there for what the actual production is. And then it will say actual production did, just like the material one did. So I haven't actually done anything different yet. So it's so like the material usage. I get that far and I haven't actually changed anything. I could actually keep going, couldn't I, at that point? I could say, okay, well, we need a variance. It's going to be in hours because it's a labour variance. I need to multiply it by the standard cost. It's a labour variance, that's the cost of an hour. And that will give me the variance in money. But apart from the fact that I've added the word hours into a couple of places, can you see how similar that variance is? It's almost a copy and a paste so far. I really haven't done anything that different. So actual production should, actual production did. Now, when we talk about labour, labour are people, labour are staff. When we talked about materials, we said we should use and we did use. It's not really politically correct to use the word use when we're talking about people. We don't want to think that we use our staff. It's just not nice, is it? So we just change the word and we say actual production should take. How long should it take us to produce those units? And actual production did take. How long did it take us to produce those units? We get our variance in hours. But apart from changing that one word from use to take and using the word hour instead of litres, that is the same variance. Okay, so now I know that, I might actually fill in the actual production because it's the same as the previous one. So we can just get that straight in there. But just like the last one, what I'm interested to know is the standard information. I would like to know how long one unit should take me, and I would like to know what one unit would cost. So see if we can work that out just like we did for the material, but we now do it for the labour. So I want to know the usage. I'm just going to use that word, why not? So I want to know how many hours are used per unit. So I want to know the hours per unit. If I want to know hours per unit, remember the per turns into a division. So hours per unit. So start with the hours, divide by the units. And this is what should happen. This is the standard. So the hours divided by the units is 0.8. 0.8 of an hour, just less than an hour then. 80% of an hour. 0.8 of an hour. That's how long it takes. What is it costing? Well, that's a nice one, isn't it? Because it just tells me outright. I don't think I actually have any more work to do there at all. It says the standard cost of an hour is £12. So if I was doing a standard cost card, it would say, in terms of labour, you're looking at 0.8 of an hour, paid at £12 per hour. And all I've done is dissect my standard cost information. And I just do that as I read the question as part of my initial setup, because then I can focus purely on answering the question without anything extra fiddly being thrown at me. So let's now use what we know. We know the actual production because we just did a material. Oh, I see. Yeah, that was me being silly there. They're not using the same question data, are they? So I can't use that actual production. I do apologise. I had jumped ahead of myself there and thought it was the same question data, but it's not. So we'll have to find the actual production from this part of the question. That was a little bit premature, I think, on my part there. So let's actually go back and do it properly. So it tells me then, in terms of actual production, as I read the actual section, the actual output was 55,000 units. That's what I'm looking for, the actual production. So 55,000 units. So I need to pop that in here. That's how many units were actually produced. So it is the same as the usage variance in terms of the pro forma is almost identical. It's different question data, so it's 55,000 units. How long should each one take? We just worked that out. It was 0.8 of an hour. Let's have a look then. I've got to do 55,000 of them. They take me 0.8 of an hour each. How many hours am I looking at? 44,000 hours is what I'm expecting to take. How long did it take? Can you find that in the question? How many hours did I work? So when we do the did take, we want to know how many hours were worked. 43,000. Excellent. Let's get that in then. Because if the staff are efficient, it will take them less time than it should. they can get the job done more quickly than planned, then we'd say they are efficient. Are they efficient here? Well, it did take them less time than we planned. So I'd say that they were efficient. It's 1,000 hours different. Would you say that's a favourable variance or an adverse? Is this a good thing that it took less than we expected? It is good. Because if they can work more quickly, we can give them more work to do. We pay them per hour, so the more work we can get out of them per hour, the better. So we've got 1,000 hours, favourable variance. To turn it into money, multiply it by the standard cost of a labour hour. Well, we worked that out. It's part of our initial setup. We found that they were paid £12 per hour. So I pop that in here to get an overall answer of 12,000 favourable. And that's a labour efficiency variance done. Yet again, I'll just reiterate what I really want you to take away from these sorts of questions is the method. You can see if you learn that pro forma, then you will only have to focus on filling in the gaps. Without the pro forma, very difficult. Okay, so that was C. D. D is like a double question. It's like a 2-in-1. If I actually skip to the requirement, it's asking me a fixed overhead volume variance. And then it wants the fixed overhead incurred as well. We're going to tackle it one part at a time. Fixed overhead or volume variance. Let's do that first. So this one, incidentally, only actually features if you're using absorption costing. If you're using marginal costing, you don't have a volume variance, because the volume variance is looking at how many units you planned to produce and how many units you actually produce, and whether there's a difference between those two things. So, should we put our little pro forma together? This one does look a little bit different. We can keep it a little bit as similar as we can, but it's basically looking at, get the words right. Oops. Oh, there it is. Lost it for a second there. So with my volume variance, I want to know my budgeted production. So if you want to stick with the should and did, you could say, how many should we produce compared with the actual production, which is how many we did produce. And again, you have to learn this. But if you do, the whole question gets a bit nicer. So how many should you produce? How many did you produce? Then you'll be able to say, well, was that good or bad? Was things better than expected, or did things turn out worse than expected? That will give me a variance in units. I'll know how many units I produced either more or less than I expected. Once I know that, I need to turn it into money. So I multiply by the standard, but this is now the standard fixed overhead cost per unit. So we multiply it by our fixed overhead, OAR, the overhead absorption rate. So it's multiplied by the overhead absorption rate to give me the variance in pounds. So we start, as we did with the other ones, with the variance in units, and we turn it into money to get the variance in pounds. Now, just like the other questions that I've done, I like to find the standard information to start with. If I was putting together a cost card, what would I want to know? I'd want to know, what is the overhead absorption rate? How much overhead are you absorbing into each unit that you produce? So I'm going to start with that, and then I'm going to come back and fill this in. So what is the overhead that I plan to absorb on each unit? Let's read through, see what we know. The business manufactures a product GTO. They operate a standard costing system in which fixed overheads are, in which production overheads are fixed and absorbed on a unit basis. I knew already that they were going to be absorbed because that's the only time I have a volume variance. The budgeted activity is 25,000 units at a total fixed production cost of 187,500. So that is what should happen. That is the budgeted or the normal information. After that, we move into the actual. The actual production volume was 26,000 units and the actual expenditure is here. So that's the actual figures. And always, I know you can't write on the screen in your exam, but always it's important in your head to separate the budgeted and the actual information. So I want to know how much overhead I'm adding onto each product. What is the overhead I'm absorbing per unit? So I need the overhead per unit, or the OAR. Overhead absorption rate. It is basically the overhead per unit. And if we use my other technique of overhead per unit, taking the per to mean divide, basically becomes overhead divided by units. And it's done on the budgeted information because it's a predetermined thing. We work this out right at the beginning of the period to help us to know how much overhead to add onto each unit in our cost card. And the cost card helps us to set a selling price. So it has to be done early on. So we're looking at £7.50 of overhead to be added onto each individual unit. Now, once I know that, and because I've learned the pro forma, I think I'm good to go. I'm now going to fill in the pro forma, fill in the blanks. Let's see what it says. It says, what should you produce in terms of units? That was the budget, wasn't it? The budget was 25,000 units. Okay, so let's put that in. That's what we should produce. The actual production was 26,000 units. Change my word there. It's supposed to be produce. So 26,000. So I did 1,000 units more than I thought was possible. And you need to look at that and think, is that meaning things turned out better than expected? Or would you say that means things turned out worse than expected? Well, if I can produce more units than I planned, that's great. I've got more inventory, or I've got more goods available for customers. This is a good thing. I've produced more than I thought was possible. This is a favourable variance. Things turned out better than expected. But that is in a number of units. I need to turn it into money. So I use my overhead absorption rate. To give me a final answer of 7,500 favourable. So that's part way through D. As I said from the outset, there was no way this was just going to take us 20-something minutes or whatever they allowed us. So the fixed overhead volume variance is 7,500 favourable. That part is now done. The next part says the actual fixed production overhead incurred were. So I want to know what the actual expenditure was. Well, there's two variances in summary that I might have for overheads. One is volume, the other one is expenditure. And the expenditure volume is going to tell me how much I should have spent and how much I did spend. So let's go to our fixed overhead expenditure variance. And this one is going to ask me, it's going to say the fixed overheads should cost. Think of fixed overheads as being things like rent. So what was our budget for rent? How much did we think we were going to spend? And then what did we actually spend? So fixed overhead, imagine something like rent. What should we spend? What did we spend? What's the difference? The difference is our variance. So it's another one you learn. But if you can learn it, let's see how nice this part of the question could be. I have to go back to the question and think, well, out of these three things, it's like a jigsaw with a missing piece. Two of these pieces I must know, and the other one I've got to find out. Well, the question says the actual fixed overhead incurred were. The incurred means what did you spend? So it's this one that's missing. That's what I'm aiming for. That must mean I've got the other two. So let's have a look. Fixed overhead should cost. It says the budgeted activity is for 25,000 units at a total cost of 187,500. So that is how much I planned to spend. So I can get that in first. This is the question mark for now. Now, there's only one possible way that I can find the answer to this. If I don't know what those question marks are, then I have to know what the variance is, because there's only three things. I need to know 2 out of 3 to find the answer. But the question does tell me the fixed overhead expenditure variance was £10,000 favourable. So I'm going to put that in next. Then I'm going to work backwards. So I should spend 187,500. The variance is 10,000 favourable. What did I spend? Anybody like me to give an answer? What do you think the answer is going to be for that? We know what we should spend. We know we've got a favourable variance. Yes, absolutely. Well done, everybody. There you go. You did spend less than you expected. So 177,500. And if you know that variance in its blank form, which is what I've done with everyone so far, then they're not so bad. Just like cooking isn't so bad if you've got a recipe and you've got the ingredients. You just have to follow the instructions. Well, these are the instructions. That's the learning part. So that is our fixed overhead expenditure. That is what we did actually spend, what we incurred. So that's the answer to that part there. So 177,500. Okay. Well, we're a little bit over our time allocation, but I'll keep going. You can, if you need to leave, I appreciate that. The recording will be on its way. But we're here now, aren't we? We're all together, so we might as well finish off. We've got part E still to do. So just one part of the question left, but that one part of the question does have multiple parts to it. So, but we are here, so I think we'll give it a go. Why not? So part E, a company operates a standard absorption costing system. Details of the budgeted and actual figures for May are given below. Now, I actually like this question. That's the first time I feel like we're being presented with the information in a more logical format, in a table. So it tells me how many units I'm planning to produce in the budgeted column, how many hours per unit, what is the cost per hour. This is like my standard cost card information that I've been harping on about wanting in every bit of the task so far. And thankfully this time, they've just handed it to me on a plate. So this is my standard cost. 4 hours, £11 per hour. We're looking at a standard cost of £44 for the whole unit. And then I've got the equivalent information based on the actual quantities. Then I've got to complete the table below. Now, a lot of people don't like these style of tasks, and I can see why. But then I think if you can just take a step back and think, let me just take a breath, just calm down, and then read the requirement as many times as you need to then extract the bits that you need. I quite like these. So it's asking firstly for the budgeted labour hours for the actual production. Take it literally. The budgeted labour hours needed for actual production. So how many hours am I budgeting for my actual production? What do I need? I need the actual production. So let's go to production units. Let's go to actual and pull that one out. So that's the actual production part done. And the budgeted labour hours? Well, under the budget, it does tell me I need 4 hours for 1 unit. But if I need the budgeted hours for actual production, I need 4 hours for each of the 8,400 I'm planning on doing. So I need to multiply 4 times 8,400. So we're looking at 33,600 in there. And we approach every bit of the question just like that. So read it twice, 3 times if you need to. This one is the budgeted total labour cost. So there's a few things in there. The budget and the total. So not just the cost of 1 hour, the cost of all of them. So the budgeted total labour cost. So I'm looking for pounds now, not hours, for the budgeted production. Well, the budgeted production, if I start there, because it seems like an easier thing to find, the budgeted production, go to the budget column, go to the production row, 10,000 units. So I want the total labour cost, the budgeted total labour cost. So I'm still in the budgeted column. What do I know? £4 for one, 4 hours for one, and £11 each hour. So it's actually £44 for a unit. So now it wants to know what is the cost of the budgeted production. I say, well, it's £44 for one, 10,000 altogether. Do you agree? £440,000. Excellent. Well done, Rebecca. Thank you. And Laurel as well. Good. Getting the hang of these. It's just a case of dissecting and not rushing each one. So I think most mistakes are made here by rushing or panicking. Let's go to the next one. The budgeted total labour cost. That sounds very familiar. So the budgeted total labour cost, this time for actual production. Can you see the difference? It is mostly the same. It's just it was for budgeted production before, now it's for actual production. So the budgeted cost is still £44 for each unit. But instead of basing it on the 10,000 units budget, I'm going to base it on the 8,400 actual. So 369,600. Very similar. So when the sentence looks the same, that's good. Sometimes it makes us panic. We think, oh no, goodness, what have I just done? What was it asking for now? Look where the difference is. One wanted budgeted, one wants actual. Then, next one, the actual total labour cost for actual production. We'll start with the actual production because we just dealt with that one. The actual total labour cost. What is the actual cost of one unit? Would it give me that? Actual cost of one unit. £10.20 is the actual cost of 1 hour. And then that's it. Madeline got it right there. Actual cost of 1 hour, but it takes us 4.5 hours. So you multiply those together to get £45.90. Just like when we did the budgeted cost of a unit, we took the hours of a unit times the cost of 1 hour. We know how long it takes. We know what it costs for 1 hour. Same thing, but with the actual figures. Very good. So now we know the unit costs me £45.90, but I don't want the cost of one unit. I want the cost of 8,400 of them. There we go. Good work. So those, I think, are quite nice. When you've got to practice them a bit, because you've got to really dissect each word in the question. Is it actual? Is it budget? Is it total? Is it per unit? I'm not saying it's easy. I'm just saying with practice, it gets easier. Then the next one wants to know the total cost variance. Well, this is a labour variance, isn't it? Because everything in it so far has been about labour. And my total labour variance, I'm not going to write out the entire pro forma, but the total labour variance, just like all my others, needs to compare like with like. And it's based on actual production. So I want to know actual production should cost, actual production did cost. So here I have actual production, actual cost. So that is actual production did cost. So actual production, another way of saying that is actual production did cost, because this is the actual cost of actual production. This one is the budgeted cost of actual production. So that's what actual production should cost. So if I was writing out a full pro forma, it would be on those lines. That's just a very abbreviated version. Actual production should cost, actual production did cost. That's my difference. The difference is the variance. So should cost 369,600, did cost 385,560. It's looking like I spent a bit more than I planned. So difference of 1,500, this is in money, 960. And adverse, it says should be in brackets. So that's why I denote it's adverse. There's nowhere to write the word adverse. So I have to just put my answer into brackets, because it did cost more than it should have done. And then the final one in the table, the cost variance percentage. Whenever you do a percentage, whether we're doing a percentage in terms of, let's say, like a movement in gross profit margin or something like that, or here, a cost variance percentage, you're going to take the actual variance itself divided by the starting point. And the starting point here is, well, this is what it should have cost me. So my answer for this is to take the variance divided by what it should have cost. If I was building a house or building an extension on my house, perhaps, and my budget was £10,000 and I ended up spending £15,000, and somebody said to me, what's your overspend? I'd say 50%, because I'd look at how much extra I'd spent compared with what I planned to spend. So my answer here to the nearest whole number is 4%. Actually comes out at 4.3, but 4 if I round to the nearest whole percent. Okay, so nearly there. A labour rate and a labour efficiency variance to finish off. We've done a labour efficiency variance earlier, so we've already got that pro forma in our mind. We'll have a look at a labour rate variance as well. So rate and efficiency just to finish off. I think we've actually got room to fit these in here, so I might just do that, then we can keep the figures on the screen at the same time. Labour rate is just like material price. Material price was based on actual purchases. Well, this, again, we don't like to talk about buying people or buying hours from people. So let's say it's based on the actual hours paid. But it's just a turn of phrase, and this is just workings anyway. So if you want to put based on actual purchases, that's fine. That's basically what you're doing. You are buying hours from your staff. So I want to know how many hours I bought from the staff, what they should cost and what they did cost. I start getting the variance together. Actual hours should cost. Actual hours did cost. Then that will give us a variance. It's already in money. So quite a nice one. So I need to find the actual hours paid, because that's what the sentence says. So let's have a look. Actual column. What do I know? I know I actually made 8,400 units, and each unit took me 4.5 hours. So 8,400 units taking 4.5 hours each. Start with that. Very conscious I don't want this to get too squashed now. 8,400 units, 4.5 hours each. That will tell me how many hours were actually paid. And then I'm going to say what should they cost and what did they cost. Well, the table gives me the numbers I need. They should cost £11. They did cost £10.20. And you can probably start to see at this stage, I suppose if you like, that there's maybe a shortcut way of actually writing this out without needing the whole pro forma. But my point is, if you struggle with variances, if you learn the pro forma, then the right answer just falls out the end. So if you're at the point now of thinking, did we really need to write all that out? The answer is no, you didn't. If you could have got this same answer a little bit quicker, great. That just means that you're understanding this better than you were before. So I've looked at the number of hours that I paid for. What should they cost? What did they cost? They did cost less than they should have done. That's a good thing. So it's a favourable variance. And I did write it out in full, as I think if you do learn to do it like this, you have a far better chance of getting the right answer. So labour efficiency, we've done one of those before. It's based on actual production. And because it's based on actual production, it starts with actual production. Let me just leave a space for it. So actual production should take. And in the exam, you don't need to write all these variances out in full like this. You can abbreviate them however you want so they make sense to you. The reason this has taken us so long, other than the fact that I've explained everything as we've gone, is because I've written everything out in the minutest detail. Of course, in the assessment, you get the marks only for the final answer, so you can abbreviate this. It makes it a lot quicker, but it doesn't help with your revision, so I've done it in full. So the actual production then, how many units did we actually make? Let's go back and have a look. The answer is 8,400. So we actually produce 8,400 units. That's what I want to compare. How long should they take? Well, the question said it should take 4 hours. But it actually took 4.5 hours. Oops. Technology always goes wrong with a minute to spare. With that, there we go. Okay, so I know how long it should take. Let's have a look at how long it did take. This is all in hours, of course. You compare the two. It's a difference in hours. And it did take longer than it should have done. So it's adverse. Then you multiply it by the standard cost of an hour, which we know from the question. See if I've remembered it properly. Standard cost 1 hour, yeah, £11. There we go. So for each of those, we've gone over each one, minutest detail, but for each one, knowing the pro forma is what got me through it. Every time. Learn the pro forma, write the pro forma down. So as I said, use the flashcards, whatever you need to do to learn those pro formas, have them in your head, be able to just put them on the page. So if I said to you, what's the variance for labour efficiency? You just churn it out. If I say, give me variable overhead expenditure, you just churn it out. We've actually practiced a lot of them through that question. So that's really good practice and experience for you. You will get the recording for this. So I will make sure that I save this and send out my little handout of workings together with the recording. Yes, and of course, we'll go back to the labour rate one if you need to copy that one down. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to stop the recording, and then we can then go through any individual questions that you might have, and I'll take suggestions for next week.